Penelope Frost clutched her shaking hands in her lap as the stagecoach rattled westward through the rugged Texas landscape of 1875. Her fate had been sealed not by her own choosing, but by her father's gambling debts that had resulted in her being traded to a man she had never met, like she was nothing more than property. A horse and 3 bottles of whiskey, that's all her father had deemed her worth. The thought made her stomach turn as the coach carried her inexorably toward Johnson City, Texas, and the man who now owned her. The spring sun beat down mercilessly as the stagecoach rounded the final bend before Johnson City came into view. Penelope's throat tightened at the sight of the dusty main street lined with wooden buildings. Somewhere in that town awaited Earl Blackson, the man who had made the trade with her father. A horse breeder and saloon owner, according to the driver who had taken pity on her and shared what little he knew. "Johnson City up ahead, miss," the driver called down. "Be there in 5 minutes." Penelope nodded, though the driver couldn't see her. Her blue cotton dress, the best she owned, was wrinkled from the 3-day journey from Little Rock. She had left with nothing but a small carpet bag containing a spare dress, a nightgown, and the silver locket that had belonged to her mother. The locket now hung around her neck, its familiar weight the only comfort she had left. The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the Johnson City Hotel. Penelope didn't move, frozen by the reality of her situation. The driver opened the door and extended his hand. "Miss Frost, we've arrived." Penelope swallowed hard and took his hand, stepping down onto the dusty street. The sound of piano music drifted from a nearby saloon, accompanied by raucous laughter. Several townspeople paused to look at the new arrival. A young woman alone was always a curiosity in these parts. "The Blackson saloon is just down the street," the driver said, pointing. "That's where I'm supposed to deliver you." Penelope clutched her bag tighter. "Thank you," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. She walked slowly, her heart pounding with each step. The Blackson saloon was a large 2-story building with a freshly painted sign. A hitching post out front held several horses, including a magnificent black stallion that caught her eye. As she approached, the batwing doors swung open and a man stepped out, his eyes fixing on her immediately. Well, you must be Penelope," he said, his voice rough from years of whiskey and tobacco. He was older than she had expected, perhaps 50, with a graying beard and cold eyes that raked over her with open appreciation. "I'm Earl Blackson. Welcome to your new home." Penelope felt a chill despite the warm day. "Mr. Blackson," she acknowledged with a slight nod, summoning what little dignity she had left. "Come inside. You must be thirsty after your journey." He gestured toward the saloon entrance. Before she could respond, the sound of approaching hoofbeats made them both turn. A rider was coming down the main street at a steady pace. Penelope watched as the stranger dismounted in front of the general store across the street. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly under his hat. Even from a distance, she could see he carried himself with the easy confidence of a man who knew his own strength. Earl's expression darkened. "Samuel Finch," he muttered. "That man has been a thorn in my side since he arrived in Johnson City." Penelope watched as the stranger Samuel tied his horse and glanced in their direction. For a brief moment, their eyes met across the street, and something passed between them, a current of recognition, though they had never met before. Then he tipped his hat slightly and disappeared into the store. "Come on, girl," Earl said, his hand closing around her arm with uncomfortable force. "Let's get you settled." The interior of the saloon was dim after the bright sunlight outside. A few early patrons nursed drinks at scarred wooden tables while a bored-looking bartender polished glasses. A staircase led to the second floor, where Penelope presumed rooms were located, including, she realized with mounting dread, the one intended for her. "This here's the new girl," Earl announced to the bartender. "Penelope. Cost me a fine horse and some good whiskey, but a man needs a woman to keep his house." The bartender barely looked up. "Whatever you say, boss." Penelope felt her cheeks burn with humiliation. To be discussed as a purchase, as if she were no more significant than the bottles lined up behind the bar. "I'll show you your quarters," Earl said, steering her toward a door at the back of the saloon. "You'll stay in the room behind the kitchen for now. When you've proven yourself useful, maybe you can move upstairs to my room." The implications of his words made her stomach turn. The back room was small and sparse: a narrow bed, a washstand, and a small window that looked out on the dusty yard behind the saloon. A far cry from her modest but comfortable room in her father's house in Little Rock. "You'll start work immediately," Earl said. "Kitchen needs cleaning and the girls upstairs need fresh linens. You'll help with cooking and cleaning and serving drinks when we're busy." "I thought," Penelope began, then stopped herself. "You thought what?" "That you'd be a lady of leisure," Earl laughed. "Your father sold you to pay his debts, girl. You're here to work and to warm my bed when I decide the time is right." With that, he left her alone, the door closing firmly behind him. Penelope sat on the edge of the bed, finally allowing the tears she had been holding back to fall. How had her life come to this? Her father had always gambled, but she never imagined he would sink so low as to trade his own daughter to settle a debt. And now she was here, the property of a crude saloon owner in a town she'd never heard of before last week. She clutched her mother's locket, drawing strength from the connection to the woman who had loved her. Her mother would not want her to give up. Somehow, she would survive this. Somehow, she would find a way to reclaim her freedom. The next morning arrived with harsh reality. Penelope was awakened before dawn by Mrs. Hutchins, the cook, a round, weary woman who seemed neither friendly nor hostile. "Up with you, girl," Mrs. Hutchins said. "Breakfast needs preparing and the floors won't sweep themselves." Penelope dressed quickly in her spare dress, a simple brown cotton that would show dirt less than her blue one. She pinned her blonde hair up tightly and followed Mrs. Hutchins to the kitchen. The work was hard and endless. By midday, Penelope's hands were raw from scrubbing pots and her back ached from sweeping and mopping the saloon floor. Earl watched her occasionally from his usual table, where he conducted business and played cards with the local men. His gaze made her skin crawl, but she kept her head down and continued working. As the saloon filled for the midday meal, the door swung open to admit the stranger she had seen the day before, Samuel Finch. In the clearer light of day, she could see him better. He was younger than Earl, perhaps 30, with clear green eyes that took in the room with quiet assessment. He wore simple clothes, a cotton shirt, worn leather vest, and dusty trousers tucked into well-used boots. Not flashy like some of the other men, but there was something in his bearing that commanded respect. He sat at a corner table, his back to the wall, the position of a man who preferred to see trouble coming. When Penelope approached with a towel over her arm to take his order, his eyes widened slightly in recognition. "You're new here," he said, his voice deep but gentle. "You came in on yesterday's stage." "Yes, sir," she replied, keeping her voice neutral. "What can I bring you? Coffee, please." "And whatever's cooking for dinner." He studied her face for a moment. "I'm Samuel Finch. I run the Triple S ranch outside of town." "Penelope Frost," she said, then added without thinking, "though Mr. Blackson seems to think he owns that name now, too." She bit her lip, shocked at her own boldness. Samuel's eyes narrowed slightly. "Is that so?" he asked quietly. And how did Mr. Blackson come to have such a claim? Before she could respond, Earl's voice cut across the saloon. Girl, stop chatting and get back to work. Excuse me, Mr. Finch, Penelope said quickly. Moving away to fetch his coffee, throughout the meal, she felt Samuel's gaze following her. Not in the predatory way that Earl and some of the other patrons watched her, but with a thoughtful concern that was somehow more unsettling because it sparked a dangerous feeling hope. When Samuel finished his meal, he left a generous payment on the table and nodded to her as he departed. Through the window, she watched him mount his horse, a beautiful chestnut mare with a white star on her forehead, and ride away, his straight back and broad shoulders silhouetted against the afternoon sun. Stay away from that one, Earl said, suddenly beside her. His breath smelled of whiskey, though it was barely past noon. Samuel Finch thinks he's better than the rest of us because his ranch is doing well. He's got no place in my establishment except to spend his money. Yes, Mr. Blackson, Penelope murmured, turning back to her work. The days fell into a pattern. Penelope rose before dawn to help Mrs. Hutchins with breakfast, spent the morning cleaning and doing laundry, served the midday meal, and then worked into the evening as the saloon filled with drinkers and card players. Earl watched her constantly, his intentions clear in his gaze, but so far, he had not forced himself on her, a small mercy she didn't expect to last. Nearly a week after her arrival, Samuel Finch returned to the saloon. This time, he came during the busy evening hours, when the piano player was pounding out lively tunes, and the working girls from upstairs mingled with the customers, encouraging them to buy expensive drinks. Penelope was serving drinks when she noticed him enter. He looked different. He'd shaved and wore a clean shirt under his vest. He nodded to her across the room and found a seat at the same corner table. She brought him a whiskey without being asked. "Good evening, Mr. Finch, Miss Frost," he acknowledged. "You're looking well, considering." The simple observation, tinged with concern, nearly undid her. No one had asked after her welfare since she'd arrived. "I'm managing," she said, struggling to maintain her composure. "I've made some inquiries," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "About your situation. It doesn't sit right with me." Penelope glanced nervously toward Earl, who was engaged in a heated card game. "It doesn't sit right with me either, Mr. Finch, but I don't see what's to be done about it." "There's always something to be done," Samuel said. "No person should be treated as property." Before she could respond, Earl's voice boomed across the saloon. "Finch, what brings you to my establishment tonight? Decided to lose some of that ranch money at my tables." Samuel took a slow sip of his whiskey. "Just enjoying a quiet drink, Blackson." Earl approached their table, his eyes darting between Samuel and Penelope with growing suspicion. "Girl, don't you have other customers to serve?" "Yes, sir," Penelope said, moving quickly away, though she continued to listen to their conversation as she worked. "I hear you've acquired a new employee," Samuel said casually, though there was an edge to his voice. Earl chuckled. "The Frost girl. Her father owed me money, couldn't pay, so he offered her instead. Cost me a good horse and 3 bottles of my finest whiskey." "Seems a poor trade," Samuel commented. "For her, I mean." Earl's face darkened. "What I do with my property isn't your concern, Finch. A person isn't property, Blackson. The law says different when it comes to settling debts. Her father signed her over fair and square." Samuel's hand tightened around his glass. "And if someone were to buy out that contract," Earl laughed. "You interested, Finch? She's not for sale. I've got plans for that one." "Everything has a price," Samuel said evenly. "Name yours." The saloon had grown quieter, patrons sensing the tension between the two men. Penelope held her breath, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure everyone could hear it. Earl stroked his beard, considering. 2 horses, fine ones, Mind you, and 6 bottles of that Kentucky bourbon you brought in last month. Double what you paid, Samuel noted. You drive a hard bargain for something you acquired so cheaply. Earl shrugged. She's worth more to me now. Take it or leave it. Samuel drained his whiskey and stood. I'll be back tomorrow with your payment. Have her ready to leave. Penelope nearly dropped the glasses she was carrying. Earl looked equally stunned, clearly not having expected Samuel to accept his terms. Now wait just a minute, Earl began. A deal's a deal, Blackson, Samuel said firmly. Unless your word isn't good in this town. Several patrons were watching openly now. Earl's reputation as a businessman was at stake. Fine, he snapped. Tomorrow at noon. But don't think this changes anything between us, Finch. Samuel nodded once, tipped his hat to Penelope, and walked out of the saloon, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. Earl turned to Penelope, his face flushed with anger. Get back to work, he snarled. And don't get any ideas about Finch being your savior. You're just passing from one man's hands to another's. But as Penelope continued her duties, her mind raced with possibilities. Samuel Finch had shown her kindness, had spoken of her as a person rather than property. Whatever his intentions, they couldn't be worse than Earl's. For the first time since arriving in Johnson City, she felt a flicker of something like hope. That night, she could barely sleep. She packed her meager belongings and tucked her mother's locket safely around her neck. Tomorrow would bring change, whether for better or worse remained to be seen. Morning came, and with it, an unusual tension throughout the saloon. Earl was in a foul mood, barking orders and drinking heavily despite the early hour. Penelope worked silently, enduring his sharp comments and occasional rough grip on her arm when she passed too close. Just before noon, the door opened to admit Samuel Finch, leading 2 magnificent horses, a dappled gray stallion and a bay mare, both clearly valuable animals. Behind him came his ranch hand, carrying a wooden crate that Penelope presumed contained the promised bourbon. Blackson, Samuel called. I've come to conclude our business. Earl emerged from his office, his eyes narrowing at the sight of the horses. Those had better be your best stock, Finch. The gray is the son of my prize stallion. The mare is from Kentucky bloodlines. Both worth more than what you're giving up, Samuel replied coolly. Earl inspected the horses, then nodded grudgingly. And the bourbon, the ranch hand set down the crate, opening it to reveal 6 bottles of amber liquid. Earl pulled one out, examined the seal, and grunted in satisfaction. The girl's contract, Samuel said, extending his hand. Earl reached into his vest and withdrew a folded paper, the agreement Penelope's father had signed, trading his daughter for his debts. He hesitated, then slapped it into Samuel's palm. She's your problem now, Earl said. Don't come crying when you find out she's more trouble than she's worth. Samuel tucked the paper inside his own vest and turned to Penelope, who stood frozen by the bar, hardly daring to believe what was happening. Are you ready to leave, Miss Frost? He asked gently. Penelope nodded, clutching her small bag. Yes, Mr. Finch. Mrs. Hutchins appeared from the kitchen, surprisingly, and handed Penelope a small package wrapped in cloth. Some biscuits for the journey, she said quietly. Good luck, girl. Touched by the unexpected kindness, Penelope thanked her and followed Samuel out into the bright Texas sunshine. The townsfolk had gathered, drawn by the unusual sight of the horses and the rumors that had spread overnight. Samuel helped her mount the bay mare. Can you ride? He asked. Yes, Penelope said. Her father had taught her when she was young, before the gambling had consumed him. Not well, but I can stay on. Samuel nodded and mounted the chestnut he had ridden into town. My ranch is about 2 hours' ride from here, he explained. We'll take it slow. As they rode out of Johnson City, Penelope couldn't help glancing back at the saloon that had been her prison for the past week. Earl Blackson stood in the doorway, watching them leave, his expression unreadable. She turned away, facing forward toward an uncertain future, but one that, for the moment at least, felt like freedom. They rode in silence for the first hour, following a well-worn trail that wound through rolling hills covered in spring wildflowers. Finally, Penelope gathered her courage to ask the question that had been burning in her mind. "Mr. Finch," she began hesitantly, "may I ask why you did this? Purchase my contract, I mean." Samuel was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the trail ahead. "No person should be traded like cattle," he said finally. "When I heard what happened, how your father traded you to settle his debts, it didn't sit right with me." "That's very kind," Penelope said carefully, "but 2 fine horses and expensive bourbon is a high price for a moral stand." Samuel glanced at her, a hint of a smile touching his lips for the first time. "Those horses weren't as valuable as Blackson thinks. The gray has a stubborn streak that makes him nearly untrainable, and the mare is beautiful but too old for breeding." Despite everything, Penelope found herself smiling back. "And the bourbon, Kentucky bourbon, yes, but not the quality he assumes. I wouldn't serve it to my ranch hands." A small laugh escaped her first since arriving in Texas. "You tricked him." "Let's just say I made a fair trade for what I was getting," Samuel replied, his smile widening slightly. Then he grew serious again. "Miss Frost, I want to be clear about something. I purchased your contract to free you from Blackson, not to claim you for myself. That paper," he patted his vest where the contract was stored, "means nothing to me except as a way to get you away from him." Penelope studied him, trying to discern his true intentions. Men, in her experience, rarely did anything without expecting something in return. "What will happen to me at your ranch? You'll have a safe place to stay while you decide what you want to do next," he said. "My housekeeper, Mrs. Rivera, has a room prepared for you in the main house. She could use help with the cooking and household chores if you're willing, but you're not obligated." "And you expect nothing else?" Penelope asked bluntly. Samuel's expression remained steady. "I expect you to be treated with the respect any person deserves. Nothing more." They crested a hill, and Penelope gasped at the view that spread before them. A broad valley opened up, green with spring grass. In the center sat a large ranch house with several outbuildings, corrals filled with horses, and cattle grazing in the distance. A stream wound through the property, its banks lined with cottonwood trees. "S Ranch," Samuel said with quiet pride. "Named for my father, Stephen Finch, and his father before him, Simon. 3 generations of Finch men have worked this land." "It's beautiful," Penelope said honestly. As they approached the ranch, several ranch hands stopped their work to watch curiously. A tall Mexican man approached as they dismounted. "Tomás," Samuel greeted him. "This is Miss Penelope Frost. She'll be staying with us for a while." Tomás nodded respectfully. "Welcome, señorita. I will take your horse." Samuel led Penelope to the main house, a substantial 2-story structure built of stone and timber. Before they reached the door, it swung open to reveal a middle-aged Mexican woman with kind eyes and gray-streaked black hair pulled back in a bun. "Mrs. Rivera," Samuel said, "this is Miss Frost." "Welcome to S," Mrs. Rivera said with a warm smile. "Your room is ready. You must be tired from your journey." Penelope found herself unexpectedly overcome with emotion at this simple kindness. "Thank you," she managed, "Mrs. Rivera led her to a comfortable bedroom on the 2nd floor. It was larger than her room in Little Rock had been, with a real bed covered in a colorful quilt, a dresser, a washstand with a porcelain basin, and a window that overlooked the ranch yard. "Rest now," Mrs. Rivera said. "Dinner will be at 6. The bathroom is at the end of the hall if you wish to freshen up." Left alone, Penelope sat on the edge of the bed, her small bag beside her. For the first time in weeks, she felt safe. The tears came, then tears of relief, exhaustion, and lingering fear. What would happen to her now? Samuel Finch seemed honorable, but she had learned the hard way that circumstances could change in an instant. After washing her face and changing into her blue dress, now clean and pressed, thanks to Mrs. Hutchins, who must have laundered it without Penelope noticing, she made her way downstairs. The aroma of cooking food led her to a large, warm kitchen where Mrs. Rivera was preparing dinner. "May I help?" Penelope offered. Mrs. Rivera smiled. "Of course. You can set the table in the dining room." As she arranged plates and silverware on the long oak table, Penelope heard the front door open and male voices in conversation. Samuel entered the dining room with an older man she hadn't met yet. "Miss Frost," Samuel said, "this is Doc Miller, our local physician and my good friend." Doc Miller was a distinguished-looking man with silver hair and intelligent blue eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Frost. Sam here told me a bit about your situation." Penelope tensed, wondering exactly what Samuel had shared about her circumstances. "Doc comes for dinner every Wednesday," Samuel explained. "And occasionally when Mrs. Rivera makes her famous beef stew, which happens to be tonight. It's the only decent meal I get all week," Doc Miller said with a chuckle. "My cooking would make a vulture think twice." Dinner was a surprisingly pleasant affair. Doc Miller told stories about his 40 years of practicing medicine in Texas, while Samuel spoke about the spring calving and his plans to expand the ranch's horse breeding program. No one mentioned Earl Blackson or how Penelope had come to be at Triple S Ranch, for which she was grateful. After dinner, Samuel invited her to join him on the front porch. The evening was mild, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of wildflowers. They sat in rocking chairs, watching as the sun set behind the distant hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. "Doc Miller knows a family in Austin looking for a governess for their children," Samuel said after a comfortable silence. "If that's something you might be interested in, he could write to them on your behalf." Penelope considered this. "That's very kind. I do have some education. My mother insisted on it, even after she died, and my father." She trailed off, not wanting to speak ill of her father despite everything. "Your father made a terrible mistake," Samuel said quietly, "but you shouldn't have to pay for it for the rest of your life." "No," Penelope agreed, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "I shouldn't." Samuel nodded, seeming pleased with her response. "There are other possibilities, too. Mrs. Rivera has been asking for help with the household for months. The ranch is growing, and we often host business associates. Or there's a school in Johnson City looking for a teacher's assistant. The choice is yours, Miss Frost." "Thank you," Penelope said, genuinely moved by his consideration. "I need some time to think about what I want to do next." "Take all the time you need," Samuel said. "You're safe here." The following days fell into a comfortable routine. Penelope helped Mrs. Rivera with cooking and cleaning, finding satisfaction in the honest work. She learned that the household staff also included a young Mexican girl named Lucia, who came 3 times a week to help with laundry, and a teenage boy named Billy, who served as Samuel's personal assistant, running errands and helping with correspondence. Samuel himself was often out on the ranch from dawn until dusk, overseeing the cattle operation and the horse breeding program that was becoming the Triple Estes claim to fame. When their paths crossed at meals or in the evenings, he was unfailingly polite but maintained a respectful distance. One afternoon, about a week after her arrival, Penelope was hanging laundry in the yard when she noticed Samuel in one of the corrals, working with a young colt. She paused to watch as he patiently guided the nervous animal around the enclosure, his movements gentle but firm. There was something captivating about seeing this strong man being so tender with the skittish creature. Samuel looked up and caught her watching. Instead of being embarrassed, he waved her over. After a moment's hesitation, Penelope approached the corral fence. "This is Thunderbolt," Samuel said, stroking the colt's neck. "Born during the worst storm we had this spring. He's still learning to trust people." "He's beautiful," Penelope said, admiring the colt's glossy coat and elegant lines. "Would you like to meet him?" Penelope hesitated. "I don't know much about horses other than riding them occasionally." "That's all right. He's still learning about people too. You can learn together." Samuel held out his hand. "Come into the corral if you'd like." Taking a deep breath, Penelope opened the gate and stepped inside. Samuel guided her to stand beside him, showing her how to hold her hand out flat for the colt to sniff. "Let him come to you," Samuel advised. "Horses can sense fear, but they can also sense kindness." After a moment of consideration, Thunderbolt stretched his neck and delicately sniffed Penelope's palm. His velvet muzzle tickled her skin, making her laugh softly. The colt's ears pricked forward at the sound. "He likes your laugh," Samuel said, smiling. "So do I." Their eyes met, and Penelope felt a sudden warmth that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. Samuel cleared his throat and looked away first, returning his attention to the colt. "If you're interested, I could teach you more about horses," he offered. "You seem to have a natural way with them." "I'd like that," Penelope said, surprised to find she meant it. Over the next few weeks, Penelope spent more time with Samuel and the horses. She learned how to groom them properly, how to recognize signs of health or distress, and how to approach even the most nervous animals with confidence. Samuel was a patient teacher, never rushing her or making her feel inadequate when she made mistakes. She also wrote to her aunt in St. Louis, her mother's sister, whom she hadn't seen in years. She explained her situation as delicately as possible, not wanting to cause undue worry, but needing to let someone from her old life know where she was. The uncertainty of her future still weighed on her, but the immediate panic had subsided. She was safe, she was treated with respect, and for now, that was enough. One evening in late May, Samuel invited her to ride out to see a special spot on the ranch. They saddled up after dinner, Penelope on the gentle mare she had been practicing with, and Samuel on his favorite gelding. "It's not far," he promised as they rode away from the main house, following a trail that led toward the western edge of the property. The air was sweet with the scent of spring flowers, and fireflies had begun to appear in the gathering dusk. They rode in comfortable silence until they reached a small rise overlooking a pond surrounded by cottonwood trees. The setting sun reflected off the water, turning it to molten gold. "I come here to think," Samuel said as they dismounted. "My father used to bring me here when I was a boy. Said a man needs a quiet place to hear his own thoughts." "It's beautiful," Penelope said, taking in the peaceful scene. They sat on a fallen log near the water's edge. In the distance, cattle lowed softly as they settled for the night. "Miss Frost, Penelope," Samuel began, then hesitated. "I've received a letter from Doc Miller's friends in Austin. They're still looking for a governess if you're interested." Penelope felt an unexpected pang at the thought of leaving Triple S Ranch. "That's very kind of you to follow up on that opportunity." Samuel nodded, looking out over the water. "I promised you choices, and I meant it. I want you to do what's best for you. And if I'm not sure what that is yet," Samuel turned to look at her, his expression earnest in the fading light, "then you take all the time you need to figure it out. There's no rush." Something in his tone made Penelope's heart beat faster. "Samuel," she said, using his first name for the first time. "Why did you really buy my contract from Earl Blackson?" He was quiet for a long moment, selecting his words carefully. "When I first saw you step down from that stagecoach, something about you caught my attention. Not just your beauty, though you are beautiful," he added quickly, a slight flush rising on his tanned cheeks. "There was a dignity about you, even in those circumstances. Then when I heard what had happened, how you'd been traded like property, I couldn't stand by and do nothing." "So it was pity," Penelope said softly. "No," Samuel said firmly. "Respect, and maybe something else I wasn't ready to name yet." Their eyes met, and Penelope felt that same warmth she'd experienced in the corral, only stronger now. Samuel reached out slowly and took her hand in his. "I don't want to pressure you," he said. "You've had enough men making decisions about your life. Whatever happens next should be your choice, freely made." Penelope looked down at their joined hands, then back up at his face. In Samuel's green eyes, she saw honesty, kindness, and something else, a spark of feeling that matched the one growing in her own heart. "Thank you for giving me that choice," she said. They sat together as darkness fell, talking about their pasts, their hopes, their dreams. Samuel told her about growing up on the ranch, about losing his mother to fever when he was 12, about his father teaching him everything he knew before passing away 3 years ago. Penelope shared stories of her own mother, of her childhood in Little Rock before gambling consumed her father, of her dreams of someday having a family of her own. As they rode back to the ranch house under a canopy of stars, something had shifted between them. No promises had been made, no declarations offered, but a seed had been planted, one that both of them hoped might grow into something beautiful. The next morning, Penelope was helping Mrs. Rivera prepare breakfast when they heard the sound of approaching riders. Samuel, who had been reviewing accounts in his office, went to the door. His expression darkened as he recognized the visitors. "Blackson," he said coldly. Penelope's stomach dropped at the name. She moved to the window and saw Earl Blackson dismounting, along with 2 men she recognized from the saloon, his regular enforcers when customers got too rowdy. "Stay inside," Samuel told her and Mrs. Rivera. He stepped out onto the porch, closing the door behind him. Through the window, Penelope could see but not hear the conversation. Earl was gesturing angrily, his face flushed. Samuel stood his ground, arms crossed, his posture tense but controlled. After several minutes, Earl's voice rose loud enough to carry through the glass. "You cheated me, Finch." "Those horses were worthless." Samuel's reply was too quiet to hear, but his stance remained firm. Earl took a step forward, his hand moving to the gun at his hip. Instantly, several of Samuel's ranch hands appeared, rifles in hand, having noticed the confrontation from the barn and corrals. Earl looked around, realizing he was outnumbered. With a final angry gesture, he remounted his horse. "This isn't over, Finch," he shouted, loud enough for everyone to hear. Then he and his men galloped away, leaving a cloud of dust behind them. Samuel came back inside, his expression grim. "I'm sorry about that," he said to Penelope. "I should have expected he might come looking for trouble once he realized the horses weren't what he thought." "What did he want?" Penelope asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "He wanted you back," Samuel said bluntly. "Said the deal wasn't fair because I misrepresented the horse's value." "And what did you tell him?" "That you're a free woman, not property to be traded back and forth," Samuel replied. "And that if he ever sets foot on Triple S land again, he'll regret it." Penelope felt a rush of gratitude and something deeper admiration for this man who continued to stand up for her dignity when so many others had failed to do so. "Thank you," she said simply. Samuel ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd come to recognize as a sign of his frustration. Blackson is dangerous when he feels cheated. I don't think he'll give up easily." "What should we do?" Samuel's eyes met hers, and she noticed his use of we rather than I. "For now, don't go into town alone," he said. "I've already sent Tamaz to tell Sheriff Parker about Blackson's threats, but the sheriff has always been reluctant to move against him. Too many influential people enjoy Blackson's whiskey and girls." Penelope nodded, fear mingling with defiance. She refused to let Earl Blackson control her life again. For the next few days, life at the ranch continued normally, though with increased vigilance. Ranch hands took turns patrolling the property boundaries, and Samuel rarely left the main house without a rifle. Despite the tension, Penelope found herself growing closer to Samuel. Their evening conversations on the porch became a cherished ritual, a time when they could share their thoughts freely. One evening, as they watched another spectacular Texas sunset, Samuel turned to her with unusual seriousness. "Penelope," he began, "I've been thinking about what happened with Blackson, about your safety." She waited, sensing there was more. "The truth is, as long as you're here as whatever you are now, my guest, my employee, my friend, Blackson may feel he has a claim on you. But if you were to have a more defined position, a more protected status—" Penelope's heart began to race. "What are you suggesting, Samuel?" He took a deep breath. "I'm not saying this right. What I mean to say is, I care for you, Penelope. These past weeks, getting to know you, your strength, your kindness, your determination, I've come to admire you deeply. And I believe you might have feelings for me too." "I do," Penelope admitted softly, seeing no reason to deny what had become increasingly obvious to both of them. Relief washed over Samuel's face. "Then would you consider? That is, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife, not just for protection from Blackson," he added quickly, "but because I believe we could build a good life together, a happy life." Though she had begun to hope for this, the actual proposal still took Penelope by surprise. "Samuel, are you certain? You barely know me." "I know enough," he said firmly. "I know you're brave and resilient. I know you're kind to Mrs. Rivera and patient with Billy. I know you have a natural way with horses, and that you sing to yourself when you think no one's listening. I know that when you smile, it lights up something inside me that I didn't even know was dark." Tears filled Penelope's eyes at his words. "I was traded for a horse and some whiskey," she reminded him. "Are you sure you want a wife with such a past?" Samuel took her hands in his. "Your past isn't your fault. It's the future that matters to me, our future, if you'll have me." Penelope looked into his earnest green eyes and saw her answer there. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you, Samuel Finch." His face broke into a radiant smile, and he leaned forward to kiss her, their first kiss, gentle and sweet and full of promise. "We'll be married as soon as possible," Samuel said when they parted. "I'll ride into Johnson City tomorrow to speak with the minister." Penelope nodded, happiness bubbling up inside her despite the lingering threat of Earl Blackson. For the first time since her father had traded her away, she felt truly free to choose her own path, free to love and be loved in return. The next morning, Samuel prepared to ride into town. He kissed Penelope goodbye on the front porch, still marveling at the fact that she had agreed to be his wife. "I'll be back before sundown," he promised. "With luck, Reverend Thomas will agree to perform the ceremony this Sunday." "Be careful," Penelope urged. "Blackson might be watching for you in town." "I'll take Tamaz and 2 other men," Samuel assured her. "Don't worry." As she watched him ride away, Penelope couldn't help the flicker of anxiety in her chest. She busied herself helping Mrs. Rivera with household chores, trying to keep her mind occupied. Late in the afternoon, as Penelope was helping Lucia fold laundry, the sound of approaching horses made her heart leap with anticipation. She hurried to the window, expecting to see Samuel returning with news about their wedding plans. Instead, she saw Earl Blackson and 5 men riding hard toward the ranch house. "Mrs. Rivera," Penelope called urgently. "It's Blackson." The housekeeper hurried to her side, her face paling at the sight. "Most of the men are out with the cattle," she said. "Only Billy and old Miguel are here." Penelope's mind raced. "Billy," she called to the young assistant who had appeared in the doorway. "Take Miguel and hide in the root cellar. Mrs. Rivera, Lucia, go with them." "What about you, Miss Frost?" Billy asked, his young face concerned. "I'll be fine," Penelope said with more confidence than she felt. "Go quickly." As the others hurried to safety, Penelope retrieved Samuel's spare revolver from his desk drawer. He had taught her how to use it during their evening talks, concerned for her safety. She checked that it was loaded, then stepped onto the front porch just as Earl and his men reined in their horses. "Well, well," Earl said, his eyes narrowing at the sight of the gun in her hand. "If it isn't the high and mighty Miss Frost, playing at being the lady of the ranch." "Mr. Blackson," Penelope acknowledged coldly. "Mr. Finch isn't here. I suggest you leave before he returns." Earl laughed, a harsh sound that sent a chill down her spine. "That's why we're here now, darling. Finch is detained in town. Seems there was some trouble at the bank that required his attention. Might take him hours to sort out." Penelope's grip tightened on the revolver. Earl had planned this well, creating a diversion to separate her from Samuel's protection. "What do you want?" she demanded, though she already knew the answer. "You're coming back with me," Earl said. "Finch cheated me and I'm taking back what's mine." "I'm not yours," Penelope said firmly. "I'm not anyone's property." Earl dismounted, his men following suit. "That paper your father signed says different. Now you can come quietly, or we can burn this pretty ranch house to the ground with everyone inside. Your choice." Penelope's mind raced. She could fire the revolver, maybe hit 1 or 2 of them, but not all 6. And she couldn't risk the lives of Mrs. Rivera, Lucia, and the others. "If I go with you," she said, thinking quickly, "you leave everyone else alone and you leave the ranch untouched." Earl's eyes gleamed with triumph. "Deal." "I need to get my things," Penelope said, playing for time. "Fine. But Jake here goes with you." Earl nodded to one of his men. "No tricks." Penelope allowed Jake to follow her inside. As they passed the kitchen, she deliberately knocked a pan from the counter, hoping the noise would alert Mrs. Rivera to stay hidden. Upstairs in her room, she slowly gathered a few belongings, her mind working furiously for a plan. "Hurry up," Jake growled. "Boss isn't patient." Penelope picked up her mother's locket from the dresser and fastened it around her neck. As she did so, she noticed movement outside the window, riders approaching from the east, still distant but moving fast. Samuel was returning earlier than expected. She needed to stall. "I need my shawl," she said, moving to the wardrobe. "It gets cold at night." Jake grunted in annoyance but didn't stop her. When she could delay no longer, Penelope followed Jake downstairs and out to where Earl waited. She had managed to slip a piece of paper into her dress pocket, a hasty note explaining what had happened, in case she was gone before Samuel returned. "Let's go," Earl said, grabbing her arm roughly. "You can ride with me." Before he could force her onto his horse, the sound of galloping hooves made them all turn. Samuel, Tamaz, and several ranch hands were racing toward the house, rifles ready. "Damn it," Earl snarled. He shoved Penelope toward his men. "Get her on a horse." Now, in the confusion that followed, Penelope broke free and ran toward Samuel, her heart pounding. Gunshots rang out behind her. She heard Samuel shout her name, saw him urge his horse faster. Then pain exploded in her left shoulder and she stumbled, falling to her knees. She heard more shots, shouting, the thunder of hooves. Strong arms lifted her and she looked up into Samuel's worried face. Penelope, my God, you're hit. I'm all right, she managed, though the pain was intensifying. It's just my shoulder. Samuel's expression hardened as he turned to Earl, who was now being held at gunpoint by Tamaz and the other ranch hands. His men had either fled or been subdued. You shot her, Samuel said, his voice dangerously quiet. You came to my property and shot the woman I love. Earl's bravado faltered in the face of Samuel's cold fury. It was an accident. We just came to talk. With 6 armed men, Samuel turned to his foreman. Tamaz, take him to Sheriff Parker. Tell him Earl Blackson is charged with trespassing, attempted kidnapping, and shooting Miss Frost. The sheriff won't hold me, Earl spat. I own half the men in Johnson City. Not anymore, said a new voice. Doc Miller rode up, accompanied by several townsmen Penelope recognized from her brief time at the saloon. I've been gathering statements all week about your business practices, Blackson. About the girls you keep against their will, the crooked card games, the protection money you collect. Sheriff Parker may have looked the other way before, but he can't ignore sworn statements from 20 respectable citizens. Earl's face paled. You can't prove anything. We'll see about that, Doc Miller said grimly. Take him away, boys. As Earl was led away, still protesting, Samuel carefully lifted Penelope and carried her into the house. Mrs. Rivera, he called. The housekeeper emerged from hiding, gasping at the sight of Penelope's bloodied dress. Dios mio, what happened? Blackson shot her, Samuel said tersely. Doc, can you help her? Doc Miller followed them inside, his medical bag already in hand. Let's get her to a bed. The bullet needs to come out. What followed was a blur of pain for Penelope. Doc Miller gave her laudanum before probing the wound, but it only dulled the agony rather than eliminating it. Samuel held her hand throughout, his face etched with concern and barely controlled anger. The bullet went clean through, Doc announced finally. That's good news. With proper care, she should recover fully. After the doctor had cleaned and bandaged the wound, he left Samuel and Penelope alone. The laudanum was making her drowsy, but she fought to stay awake. I was so afraid, Samuel admitted, stroking her hair gently, when I saw you fall. How did you know to come back? Penelope asked. We never made it to town, Samuel explained. We ran into some cowboys from the Parker Ranch who told us Blackson and his men had ridden past them heading for Triple S. We turned around immediately. Thank God you did, Penelope murmured, her eyelids growing heavy. Rest now, Samuel said softly. I'll be right here. Despite the pain in her shoulder, Penelope fell asleep with a sense of peace. The danger had passed. Earl Blackson would face justice at last, and she was where she belonged with the man who had given her back her freedom and her future. The next few days passed in a haze of recovery. Penelope's wound healed cleanly, thanks to Doc Miller's skilled care and Mrs. Rivera's herbal remedies. Samuel rarely left her side, reading to her, telling her stories about the ranch's history, or simply sitting with her in comfortable silence. News came from town that Earl Blackson had been formally charged not only with shooting Penelope, but with a host of other crimes that townspeople had finally found the courage to report. The saloon had been closed, and the women who had worked there, many against their will, had been offered assistance to start new lives elsewhere. As for Penelope's father, a letter arrived from her aunt in St. Louis. William Frost had been found dead in a Little Rock alley, apparently after losing badly at cards. Though Penelope had not forgiven him for what he had done, she mourned the man he had once been, the father who had taught her to ride and had loved her mother deeply before gambling consumed him. A week after the shooting, Penelope was strong enough to sit on the front porch, enjoying the early summer sunshine. Samuel joined her, pulling his chair close to hers. Reverend Thomas came by while you were resting, he said. He's willing to perform our ceremony whenever you're ready." Penelope smiled. "I'd like that, though perhaps we should wait until I can walk down the aisle without wincing." Samuel laughed. "As long as you need. Though I admit I'm eager to call you Mrs. Finch." "Samuel," Penelope said, turning serious, "are you certain this is what you want?" After everything that's happened, he cut her off with a gentle kiss. "More certain than I've ever been of anything. I love you, Penelope Frost. Not despite what you've been through, but including it. Everything you've experienced has made you who you are, the woman I want to spend my life with." Tears of happiness filled Penelope's eyes. "I love you too," she said. "When my father traded me away, I thought my life was over. I never imagined it was just beginning." Samuel took her hand, his thumb gently caressing her palm. "Your father made a terrible trade," he said. "But I made the best deal of my life." 3 weeks later, on a perfect summer morning, Penelope Frost became Penelope Finch in a ceremony on the front lawn of S Ranch. She wore a new dress of ivory silk that Mrs. Rivera and Lucia had worked on secretly, and carried a bouquet of wildflowers gathered from the meadow by the pond. Samuel, handsome in a new black suit, couldn't take his eyes off her as she walked toward him on Doc Miller's arm. The ranch hands and their families attended, along with many townspeople who had come to respect Samuel and were curious about the woman who had indirectly brought down Earl Blackson. After the ceremony, tables laden with food were set up under the cottonwood trees, and there was dancing and laughter until the sun went down. That night, as husband and wife, Samuel and Penelope stood on the porch of what was now their home, looking out at the stars that spangled the Texas sky. "Happy?" Samuel asked, his arm around her waist. "More than I ever thought possible," Penelope replied honestly. 5 years later, Penelope sat on the same porch, watching as Samuel taught their 3-year-old son, William, to brush a gentle pony. Their infant daughter, Rose, slept in her cradle nearby, her tiny fist curled around the silver locket that had once belonged to Penelope's mother. S Ranch had prospered beyond Samuel's most ambitious dreams. His horse breeding program had gained national recognition, and the cattle operation had expanded into neighboring properties that he had been able to purchase. Penelope had become not just his wife but his partner in every sense, keeping the books, managing the household staff, and even developing a small side business breeding the beautiful Arabian horses she had come to love. The town of Johnson City had changed too. With Earl Blackson gone, he had been sentenced to 15 years in the state prison. The saloon had been converted into a respectable hotel and restaurant, now run by Mrs. Hutchins, who had revealed a talent for cooking once freed from Blackson's employ. A proper school had been built, and Penelope taught reading lessons there twice a week, passionate about ensuring other young women would have the education they needed to control their own destinies. Samuel came up the porch steps, carrying their sleepy son. "I think someone's ready for his nap," he said, smiling at Penelope. "Just like his sister," Penelope said, glancing at the still sleeping Rose. After putting William down for his nap, Samuel returned to the porch and sat beside his wife. "I received a letter today," he said, "from the governor's office. They're considering my proposal for the new railroad spur to run through Johnson City." "Samuel, that's wonderful," Penelope exclaimed. "The railroad would bring new opportunities to the town and make it easier to transport their cattle and horses to eastern markets." "It's all because of you, you know," Samuel said, taking her hand. "You're the one who suggested approaching the governor directly." Penelope smiled. "We make a good team." "The best," Samuel agreed, leaning over to kiss her. "Do you ever think about how we met? How different our lives might have been?" "Sometimes," Penelope admitted. I think about how something that seemed so terrible being traded away by my own father led me to the greatest happiness I've ever known. Samuel's expression grew thoughtful. I've been thinking lately about that contract, the one your father signed with Blackson, that I bought. Penelope raised an eyebrow. What about it? I still have it locked in my desk, Samuel said. I've kept it all these years as a reminder. A reminder of what? Of how precious freedom is. And how easy it is to take it away from someone. He squeezed her hand. I'd like to burn it, together. It doesn't have any power over us anymore, but I think it would be fitting to destroy it completely. Tears welled in Penelope's eyes at this final gesture of liberation. I'd like that very much. That evening, after the children were asleep, Samuel retrieved the yellowed document from his desk. They took it to the fireplace in their bedroom, where a small fire burned against the evening chill. Your father traded you for a horse and some whiskey, Samuel said softly, but I would have given everything I own to set you free. You did set me free, Penelope said, in every way that matters. Together, they placed the contract in the flames and watched as it curled and blackened, then disintegrated into ash. As the last piece vanished, Samuel took Penelope in his arms and kissed her with all the love and passion that had grown between them over the years. Outside, the Texas night was alive with the sounds of crickets and distant coyotes. The Triple S Ranch lay peaceful under the stars, a kingdom they had built together not through ownership or possession, but through partnership, respect, and love. Penelope Frost Finch, once traded for a horse and some whiskey, had found something far more valuable, a life of her own choosing, with a man who had seen her true worth from the very beginning.